And here's what happens. In the original story, My Fair Lady is programmed. But then culture itself, through the actors and actresses, rewrite the story, and it becomes not just is Eliza transformed into My Fair Lady, but My Fair Lady, who is Eros herself, transforms Higgins. Are we awake? We alive? Are we ready to go? We have a big day. Like, we have like a big, crazy day. Like, I can't even, it's like such a crazy privilege to be here. And it's so exciting. It's so, trembling, right? It's so alive. We're going to awaken from more torporitic slumbers. When was the last time you got to use the word torporitic? Just checking the chat box. Who's used the word torporitic in the last day or so? Anybody torporitic? Torporitic? Yes. So a couple of things. I'm going to try and talk next week or the week after, a little bit about what I think are one dimension of the implication of the elections that happened in North America. And we are not an American show. we're actually based in Belgium, right? The location of the center is officially from Belgium. Our holding organization, the Office for the Future, is located in Belgium, and it holds the think tank, the Center for World Philosophy and Religion. But we have, people from the United States and Europe and other parts of the world. So I don't want to focus only on, things that are in a particular country, but I think the implications of the North American elections, the elections in the United States are significant. There's a lot to say about them. Most of it I'm not going to say at this point, but I would like in the next couple of weeks to speak about what I think is actually happening here and why it matters and what our relationship to it is and how it needs to be engaged and transformed for the sake of the future of humanity. So that's a very big deal. So I just want to kind of just say that that's a promise I've promised, a couple of people privately. All sorts of people have been, talking to me about this. So I am going to do that. Okay. And I'm waiting with intention, in part because I'm trying to understand more. I had an initial understanding of where things were going, as things happened, and I'm just gathering and listening and talking. So that's one. So that's just one. Two, and this is just kind of like this is kind of before we dive in. Two is these are just like sisterhood announcements, ladies auxiliary announcements. I'm the sisterhood chair, right, at our evolutionary church, our One Mountain Many Paths. So I'm just a couple of very, very important announcements. So, but they're great and wondrous. So there's a book that we put out in 2011, which is, if I can, be audacious and say it, I believe it's one of, the more important books, right, of the last century, right, that addresses this issue of who we are. Who are you? But it addresses it in a very particular way. My friend Ken Wilber thought that it was kind of the defining book, right? I think so too. I by the way, I hate knee-jerk humility. It's just so completely annoying. So I wrote the book, right? It's called Your Unique Self, and it's a kind of 500-page tome. I wrote about 1,000 pages. We published about 500, and it is, in my understanding, the best understanding we have of, in the most succinct form possible, 500 pages being succinct form, the answer to the question of who are you? Who are you? You're a unique self. What does that mean? And unique self is one of, 4 selves, really 6 selves. From after the book was published, and maybe we can even put maybe we can just put the book in the chat box so people can see it. So we published the book, Your Unique Self, and that book was published after a huge set of, I would call, contestations. Is that a fair word? I would say arguments, fierce debates with leaders both in the psychology movement and kind of the leading teachers of what's called enlightenment, or kind of certain kinds of wisdom around the world. One of those deep sets of conversations was with Ken Wilber. And Ken and I did a very, very deep set of conversations around this. And the result of the conversations is that Ken joined me in this and really transformed, in some deep sense, the vision of self that he was presenting in the world. And the unique self, in some sense, it's fair to say, kind of changed the way the world of enlightenment teaching, at least some parts of it, talk about self in a very, very fundamental way. I had a series of talks with Dick Schwartz, I just found last night, who does internal family systems, that also kind of helped shape and formulate, very, very important directions, right, in that world. And it just rippled through. But we were in mid-conversation. So right after Unique Self came out, we did another book called Self, 2 Models of Self. All right. And then in 2014, we did a short book called Success 3.0 in Your Unique Self. We did a course in 2011. We did a scholarly journal, the Journal of Integral Theory and Practice, devoted a scholarly journal to this new chapter, right, kind of called Unique Self. But what's really happened is that our understanding of this most fundamental human question, who am I? What's the answer to who am I, which affects everything else, has deeply evolved since 2000, and excuse me for moving the computer, since 2011. And so we started a Unique Self Institute, which is headed by Claire Molinaire. There's a Unique Self Institute website. And the purpose of Unique Self Institute was to really gather all the resources of Unique Self, right? And to then evolve the Unique Self conversation. So the Unique Self Institute is a fantastic website with just it's chock full of just very, very deep content. Excuse me. It's not a public facing website, although you can access it on the web, but it's not, maybe some tea, but it's not geared for marketing, right? It's really to hold that resource. But the most important thing we wanted to do, and I would ask everyone just to kind of take a look at the Unique Self Institute site, and it's fabulous and beautiful, right? But one of our purposes and commitments was to actually evolve Unique Self. Because often what happens is a theory gets set in stone, and then it doesn't develop, it doesn't deepen. And we made a big, big commitment to deepen it. And we've been trying to get started for the last couple of years, a series of 3-week courses in which we would essentially do Unique Self 2.0. In other words, and there's about 15, literally 15, about 15 next steps, right? Material that's not in the Unique Self book that we've actually talked about in various formats over the last 14 years. It's actually not written down in any coherent way. And because Unique Self is at the very center of Homo Amor, right? The new human and the new humanity, because Unique Self is at the very center of first principles and first values, it seemed critical to do. So we're doing the first one of those courses. It's a 3-week course. It starts at exactly 2:00 today, so in 40 minutes, right? If you want to still sign up for it, you can. We didn't do a major push for it. We just kind of put it in the world. I think there's 40, 50 of us there. All right. It's going to be fantastic. It's like insanely, insanely important. So just two small things. Then we're going to do this like insane dive about My Fair Lady. in the meta crisis and the election and everything. Like where are we? Why are we doing this? So I'm not going to go through the kind of entire intention setting of we're responding to the meta crisis and this time between worlds and time between stories and creating a new story of value, which is the only thing that could actually change the vector of history and actually avert suffering and create unimaginable joy. There's a love or die. There's a love or die article which kind of talks about this in a beautiful way, which we always put in, which kind of gives you the context and the frame of what we're doing here. And I did last week a kind of a big recapitulation of that in our conversation on unique risk, which Christina Amlin so gorgeously recapitulated today. But I do want to say, and just invite, if you'd like to actually step in, there's no feeling like being in a community of people who are actually feeling the whole, who are loving each other with the most integrity they can muster, and then some. So it's a think tank, it's an activist think tank, but it's also a band of outrageous lovers. It's also a band of erotic mystics. So it's a group of intellectuals, feelers, thinkers, artists, creative poets. People are taking responsibility for the whole. In a certain sense, the new elect of this generation is not the priests or the rabbis or the spiritual masters or the politicians or the economists or the ones who get most attention. It's the people who say, we're going to take responsibility for the whole. We're going to make the Da Vinci move. We're going to be activists. We're going to be ontological activists for the sake of the whole. And we do this. So, for example, this course, right? So I said to KK, I said, there's this whole great group of people signed up, and she said, oh, we'll make some money on this. I said, well, no, we won't. Right? So, the money goes to Parallax and, a little bit to Unique Self Institute. So I said, maybe we'll make enough to order 2 courses at dinner, right? Meaning, and I mean that, and the reason I share it is this is not a fundraising movement. We're going to learn to do marketing at the next level to invite more people in. And our dear friend Eli is going to step in with us in that great enterprise. But ultimately, this is about bringing the ideas down, about living the new story, about invoking the new human, about becoming the new human. And so we're artists, right? Before and after everything. And right after the election, I shared with you some texts on what does it mean to be an artist in a time between worlds. We're social artists, we're spiritual artists, right? We're creating this new world together, and let's arise, right? The world is desperate for us to do this. She is desperate for us to do it. But it's not a kind of, as it often is in the spiritual world, it's not an economic enterprise which happens to be peddling a particular product. It's the exact opposite. And although we're very, very careful and we watch our budgets extremely carefully, and we pay substandard salaries, and I don't take a salary, right? It's just so so on the one hand, we try and be robust and effective financially. And Zach and I had a long conversation yesterday about the need to quadruple the budget in order to actually be able to write the great library. And a dear close friend of mine, I'll just call her L because she can give me permission to share this, said that, at some point, someone's going to drop either 14 or $44 million on the center, and I shouldn't worry about it. So it hasn't happened yet, but I'm not worried. It was a good prophecy. So we need to up level in every way, but that's not what the center's about. So just to really understand that as you sign up for a course, right, the center's about being the revolution, and we're madly committed to it. And I would live in a little half a room flat, right, in order to do the revolution and be destitute and poor, right, if we could get this done. Okay, so it's like this is what's desperately needed, right, to respond and create a future, right, to ensure that there will be a future. There are trillions of unborn boys and girls, men and women, right, waiting, right, to be born, whose birth is in some deep, profound sense dependent on our capacity to bring down, to articulate, to tell this new story of value, and to download it into the source code of culture. Okay, so that's one, and let's dive in. So Terry, here's what I want to do with your permission. I want to kind of share with everybody. We're going to do an entirely new world today. We're going to do part one today. We may do part two next week. I know we also did kind of part one of unique risk. So we have a part two of unique risk also kind of that we need to do. So I'm going to try and make like 30 points. Okay, are we ready? Are we ready? We're diving in. New world, new material, new possibility, new vision, new way of saying it, new way in, new door we're opening. Are we ready? Are we ready to play a larger game? It's our ritual question. Are we ready to play a larger game? Are we ready to play a larger game? Are we ready to participate in the evolution of love? So here we go, right? Like the first time we met, the first time we're virginal. Let's let all of the cynicism go and all of the old voices go, right? And all of the traumas go, right? And all of the, right? We're inside. Here we go. Okay, here we go. One of the major movements in culture today is the introduction of this higher level chat box, okay? Chat GPT-4. Chat GPT-4 introduced into the world by OpenAI. We've been in touch at the think tank with OpenAI in multiple conversations. That's a bracket to try and actually begin to bring some real conversation together between us. But OpenAI has basically introduced a chatbot. And what does the chatbot do? Anyone with me? Anyone with me? What does the chatbot do? What does a chatbot do? A chatbot chats. Okay, you get that? What does chat mean? What does a chatbot do? A chatbot chats. What does a chat mean? What does a chat mean? A chat's a conversation. Okay, a chat is a conversation. That's what a chatbot does. A chat box is about a conversation. And the aim of ChatGPT-4, right, is to not just have a conversation which delivers information. And so the chatbot's not just delivering information, the chatbot is having a conversation. It's trying to enact the experience of a conversation, to enact the experience of a conversation. But the chatbot's actually not having a conversation. The chatbot's actually built on what are called LLMs, large language modules. How large language modules work in their interior is quite mysterious. So I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. In some very real way, as Hinton, who just won the Nobel Prize and was one of the lead researchers in this dimension, has pointed out, we actually don't fully understand how large language modules that drive ChatGPT-4, for example, this advanced form of artificial intelligence, we actually don't understand exactly how the large language modules work, but sufficient to say that there's this hypercomputation happening. And this hypercomputation, right, does a set of hypercalculations, which then produce something that seems like an answer. You got this? Everyone with me? That kind of seems like an answer, seems like you're talking to someone, but you're not. It's actually completely simulated. It's artificial in the sense that it's in no sense a conversation. And yet you have this sense that you're having a conversation. One. Two, the Turing test, 30s and 40s by Alan Turing, Turing machines, the early computers. Turing considered the father of computers, right? The Turing machines, right, were the beginning of the computer age. And at that moment, there was an articulation by Turing, which, and some colleagues, which became known as the Turing test. Everyone with me? The Turing test. And what's the Turing test? So the Turing test is, can you have a conversation with some kind of computer? The word AI, artificial intelligence, wasn't quite in vogue, but there were serious researchers working on this. Lena, I think your grandfather was deeply involved in this in Russia. Right? So the Turing test meant, can a computer pass the conversational test? Does everyone get that? Can the computer pass the conversational test? Can the computer, right, actually give you an experience that you're talking to a human being, right? So there's this move towards conversation. Now, of course, the computer could pass that test because the computer is actually kind of become human, right? And again, let's just go with what is right, right? We're getting the general Turing test thing correct. Let's kind of get the right, and let's kind of get the can you recognize, right? Do you feel like you're having a human conversation, or do you realize no, it's not a human conversation, it's a computer? Okay, so that's right. That's our Turing test. So the Turing test revolves around conversation. It revolves around conversation. Okay, that's a kind of a general. Let's kind of get the general that revolves around conversation. Now, ChatGPT-4 is a current form, right, of chat having a conversation. Obviously, when we're talking to ChatGPT-4 right now, we know we're talking to ChatGPT-4. So ChatGPT-4, obviously, as it is right now, doesn't pass the Turing test. Of course not, right? But there's this movement, and I'm going to kind of trace this movement. It's a very deep movement towards the experience, right, that I'm actually having a real conversation, right? And this is, we're going to call this the personhood conferral issue, which I've actually spent a lot of time looking at very carefully together with Zach. Zach's kind of taking the lead in dimensions of what we named the personal conferral problem, meaning we confer personhood, right, on a chat box, and we begin to tutor children through AI tutors. And it's AI tutors step in and they displace education, and AI tutors become this very, very living, right, alive sense of reality. Okay, so that's kind of three. Let's call it kind of the personhood conferral problem, right, which is related, although not the same as the Turing test, in which we begin to have this experience that we're actually having a conversation. Of course, number four, there was an entire movie made about this, right, called Her by Spike Jonze in 2013, in which Samantha is the AI assistant, and she, although it's very clear to him technically, he understands technically this is an AI assistant, but she's so good, right, at knowing who he is because she has so much information available in her database. She knows so much about him, based on kind of the nuances of who he is. And Spike Jonze saw a chatbot operating, and he based Her, the movie 2013 Her, right, this kind of simulated AI assistant Samantha, who Theodore falls in love with, right? He bases, and I'm going to get back to this movie in a little bit, he bases it on his experience of watching a chatbot between 2011 and 2013. So you've got this kind of chatbot. Now, the original chatbot, that's number four. And again, I want to flow with you a little bit here, okay? Don't get caught on any individual thing. Try and kind of open your heart, open the kind of contraction, and just kind of feel, let's just flow with it. The original chatbot, right, or the what's often called the original chatbot. We don't have to be precise in terms of but what's kind of known as the original chatbot was made by Joseph Weizenbaum. Joseph Weizenbaum makes this chatbot. He's a computer, early artificial intelligence researcher, and he does it in 1966. Okay, this original chatbot, and he calls the chatbot Eliza. Okay, now why does he call the chatbot Eliza? That's five. Right now, just to say, Weizenbaum calls the chatbot Eliza because he had watched the play My Fair Lady, and the lead character in My Fair Lady is Eliza Doolittle, and Eliza Doolittle, however you pronounce her name, Eliza, let's call her Eliza. And Eliza, right, is this figure who I'm going to come back to in a couple of minutes, whose language is inadequate in some way. She's a Cockney flower girl, and a professor named Higgins, who's a linguist, patterned after some combination of 3 or 4 famous linguists in England at the time, but in the play it's Higgins, right? So Higgins essentially programs new language into Eliza, and in a period of 6 months, she can pass as a duchess. So Joseph Weizenbaum, number 7, right? Patterns, you with me? Right? He not patterns, he names his chatbot Eliza. Now stay close. 8. The reason he names her Eliza is not because he thinks that his chatbot could pass the Turing test. Does everyone get this? No, he's calling her Eliza because he's saying, oh, Eliza in My Fair Lady, he's giving a particular read of My Fair Lady, which I'm going to get to in a second. But what he's saying is Eliza is this living person. She's this living, loving, alive being. And although Higgins programs language into her, she's not reducible to a chatbot. She's a fully alive personhood. So he calls, this is how he explains it. This is his explanation, right? In his diaries and in articles that he wrote. He says, I'm going to call this 1966 chatbot, which is the precursor to ChatGPT-4. I'm going to call this chatbot Eliza in order to mock the notion that a chatbot could actually have personhood, or that someone could confuse between a chatbot or think they're having a real conversation with a chatbot. He says, how crazy absurd is that? Everyone with me so far? That's number 8, approximately. Okay, everyone with me? Who's with me? Who's with me? Are we together? Okay, we together? We moving? We rocking? We getting it? Okay, so we're doing a lot, okay? So now look what happens. So what happens is number 9. So what happens is the opposite of what Weizenbaum thought. Joseph Weizenbaum thought, oh, everyone's going to realize this is just a chatbot. This is not alive. But actually, his secretary starts asking for alone time with Eliza. Literally, the secretary says, could you tell me when you're leaving, Dr. Joseph? I'd like to have some time with Eliza. And Eliza's programmed in a particular way to answer kind of quite simple questions. But actually what happens is all the people in Weizenbaum's circle are crazy excited to talk to Eliza. And they actually have this experience that they're actually having a conversation. And Weizenbaum realizes that, of course, although this is not a formal, Lena, this is not a formal passing of the Turing test, but he sees where it's going, and he realizes that actually this is not about the computer being upgraded, it's about humanity being downgraded, that we've actually lost access to what a conversation is, right? So in other words, as Jaron Lehner and others have pointed out, there's 2 ways to pass the Turing test in general. One is that the computer gets very sophisticated, right? Or humanity actually loses access to what a conversation is. That's a big deal. Okay, now kind of stay close, everybody, stay close. So Weizenbaum is actually horrified by this, and he spends his life actually both within the artificial intelligence movement and protesting against its danger. Everyone with me? Okay, but this is just we're just getting started. I'm just kind of literally laying the foundation so we can begin to have the conversation. Okay, let's say we're about 10. So let's go 11. Okay, let's go 11. Here's 11. So let's go back to My Fair Lady, and I just want to lay down the tapestry today. So what's My Fair Lady? So My Fair Lady it was originally a play by George Bernard Shaw, which kind of is first played in like 1913, 1914 in Germany and London, called Pygmalion. And Pygmalion becomes My Fair Lady. My Fair Lady is 1938. It's an early movie. And then like 1956 to 1962, it's Julie Andrews on Broadway, this long running Broadway sensation. 1964, right? It becomes, this epic movie. Who are the stars? Right. Who are the stars? Remind me. Rex Harrison. And who was the other star? Remind me. Rex Harrison. Who was the other? Right. Lane. Who else? And what's her name? Audrey Hepburn. Right. Thank you. Raquel. Awesome. Raquel, it's great to see you. Okay. So 1964, you've got this Harrison, Hepburn kind of like huge production. Okay. Now stay close. Stay close. So as I'm reading Pygmalion, right? So, wow, Pygmalion, where's Pygmalion from? Okay, so point 12. So Pygmalion's actually an original Greek myth, which has many versions, in which, Ovid in his Metamorphos, right? The ancient Roman Ovid in his, kind of narrative poem Metamorphos, right, talks about Pygmalion. And Pygmalion is a sculptor in Cyprus who is almost repulsed by the feminine. He's repulsed. He feels by the kind of he feels the power of feminine sexuality, and particularly the courtesans of Cyprus. He's repulsed by kind of the blatant nature of the feminine sexually. He can't find his way with the feminine. And so he sculpts Alethea. And Alethea is essentially a sculpture. But of course, she's the first sex doll. She's the first sex robot, right? So he fondles her, he caresses her, he kisses her, right? So he falls madly in love, Pygmalion, with Alethea. So now watch closely. So essentially, Pygmalion has programmed, if you will, Alethea. He's sculpted Alethea. He's formed Alethea. So he couldn't deal with a real face-to-face human encounter with all of its tension and all of its complexity, number one. So what does he do? He sculpts his woman. Okay, so just go slowly. Sculpts his woman. He falls in love with her. And because Aphrodite, the goddess of love, who is about love being a great value, love as a goddess, love as a value. So Aphrodite means the goddess of love, but it's also love as a great value of cosmos, Eros as a great value of cosmos. Aphrodite, who's later going to be called in Roman times Venus. Aphrodite invests Alethea with life, and Pygmalion and Alethea marry. They have a child, and the world is good. It's a strange story. It's a story about Pygmalion kind of programming Alethea. So it's this line energy, this programming energy, this linguistic energy it's a particular dimension of language. It's not all of language, that then programs the feminine, falls in love with it, and then it's animated with life. Oh, so that's Pygmalion. So George Bernard Shaw writes Pygmalion. Now, as I read Pygmalion, first I read the original myth, and then I go to read George Bernard Shaw's play, which will become My Fair Lady. Is everyone following with me? Pygmalion becomes My Fair Lady. Everyone getting the story? Pygmalion becomes My Fair Lady. Now, here's the thing. As I'm reading Pygmalion, I'm like, this is a little disturbing. And it's disturbing for a bunch of reasons. But for now, let me just say it's disturbing because the plot line is that Professor Henry Higgins, who is Pygmalion, you with me? Right? Is going to program through language, bracket, think large language modules coming up in ChatGPT-4, parentheses, end of parentheses. George Bernard Shaw has Pygmalion, who's now Henry Higgins, the linguist, is going to program through language My Fair Lady, the goddess. Does everyone get that? My Fair Lady, the goddess, she. Eros is going to be programmed. So I'm reading this and I'm like, no, this is not good. So I say this to a couple of people and they say, what are you talking about? This is My Fair Lady, Pygmalion. Relax, Gafni. Don't, you're making this up. You're like reading this stuff in. I said, I'm not. I said, I'm telling you, George Bernard Shaw, problematic. I then did a very deep dive into George Bernard Shaw. Everyone hold on to their seat. And I'm going to bring this material to the table a little later. But George Bernard Shaw actually turns out to be a Stalinist, right? I've read major essays on George Bernard Shaw, lots of literature pro con. So I did a big, in the last 2 weeks, George Bernard Shaw dive. And Christina, right, can verify that because I've been like into the middle of the night, kind of in my George Bernard Shaw dive. So it turns out George Bernard Shaw is a big time Stalinist, right? Actually, Orwell, who's this very kind of he's just a good guy. Orwell's a good guy. Orwell was all about decency, right? Orwell actually informs the British Secret Service that George Bernard Shaw is dangerous, right? Before the end of his life. And, I'm not going to give you citations now, but I did a very deep dive. But George Bernard Shaw, right, says, the most pernicious things, supporting Stalin, dimensions of Nazism, right, which are trying to program the Übermensch, right? And again, I'll bring next week the quotations to bear, right, and the information to bear and the different literatures to bear. But like, I said, okay, this makes sense to me. It's like, whoa, right? There's this programming of My Fair Lady. Does everyone get that? There's this programming of My Fair Lady. Now stay close. So what happens is Shaw writes My Fair Lady. And again, Shaw in 1914 is a kind of mixed figure. He's both he's not an evil devil with a demonized face. He's an urbane and funny and creative and, witty Englishman, right? He detests the class nature of British society. The first song in My Fair Lady, when Higgins meets Eliza in Covent Garden, right? He sings this song basically saying, why do we have classes? Classes are just based on language, right? And these lower classes actually don't even deserve to be alive. But we could give them new language, and then they would step into the richness and beauty of language. And so on the one hand, it's wildly charming and beautiful. On the other hand, as I'm reading it, it's frightening as I'm listening to the song and I'm reading the words of the song. He's saying, we'll program language. So in one sense, that's good news. Let's get rid of the class society, but let's move towards, says George Bernard Shaw, a classless society. And then Shaw, like many of the intellectuals of his time, gets caught up in Stalinism and refuses to actually look at evil in the face. So, Now look what happens, okay? Now look what happens. Now it gets like a little crazy, okay? Now it gets like a little crazy. So then, after Shaw writes My Fair Lady, the actors, after Shaw writes Pygmalion, which becomes My Fair Lady, so the actors and the producers over time, right? The original actor playing Henry Higgins changes the story spontaneously. So in Shaw's ending, Eliza walks out. She says, if I can't have kindness, I'll at least have my freedom. And Shaw's, play directions, exit Eliza's stage left. But then the actor playing Henry Higgins actually changes the story. He kind of wells up in tears. He allows the sense of having deep feelings for Eliza. And then by the 100th show of the play, he throws a bouquet of flowers at Eliza. In other words, the actor in the play gradually transforms it. You with me, everybody? You with me? Gradually transforms it into a love story. And then, and by the way, George Bernard Shaw hated it. He was furious. But then the more productions happen, the deeper it goes, the more it becomes a love story. And by the time we get to Hepburn and Harrison, what happens is there's now a double-edged move, and Terry's about to read the code. Okay, and here's what happens. In the original story, My Fair Lady is programmed. But then culture itself, through the actors and actresses, rewrite the story, and it becomes not just is Eliza transformed into My Fair Lady, but My Fair Lady, who is Eros herself, transforms Higgins. the story reverses. So I'm going to hold right here. Tara's going to read the code. We've just started. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up exactly here next week. And if you think this was interesting, it's going to get 1,000 times wilder next week. We're going to trace this wild story. And just remember, how did this start? Because Joseph Weizenbaum calls his chat box Eliza. So we're going to stop exactly right here. I'm going to turn to Terry. He's going to read the code. Okay, but just give me a sense in the chat box. Does everyone get? We're just starting. We're just getting started. Does everyone get why this matters? And why it matters is going to get 1,000% more clear next week. And I'm just laying down this entire new world. Okay, it's an entire new world. There's going to be many, many more connections. Right. It's like a wild world. Okay, so we're just getting started. Okay, like whoa, we're just getting started. We're going to unpack this. Terry's going to give us the code. We're going to hold. We're going to breathe. And we're going to go to whoever's coming with us to part 2. So like insanely great. Terry, Nelson, my brother, give us this code. And this is our evolutionary love code, which kind of sums up some of what we did and where we're going next week. But again, for next week, people, if you thought it was wild this week, it's going to go like insane off the roof next week. Terry, give us the code, brother.
The death of our humanity appears in multiple forms of totalitarianism. The depth of our humanity is found in the wonder of conversation, the richness of language, and the integrity of our stories. The totalitarian destroys conversation, language, and story. Therefore, the revolution is in the reclaiming of story, the reclaiming of conversation, and the reclaiming of language. But the story which must be reclaimed is a story of value. The model for the story of value is always the love story. The great love story, the story of value, is the engine of every sacred revolution against the totalitarian, against the death of our humanity. Because the love story liberates value and authority from the oppressive grip of the totalitarianism of the totalitarian, the love story itself is an act of rebellion.